Warning disclaimer: the story is a dramatized fictional retelling inspired by real events. It includes mature themes such as emotional neglect, infidelity, and personal transformation. All names, locations, and specific details have been altered to maintain privacy and respect for the individuals involved. The purpose of this story is not to judge or promote certain decisions, but to explore the emotional complexity behind real-life relationships and betrayals. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Emily, and until recently I thought I had the kind of life people envied. I lived in a picturesque suburb in the U.S. surrounded by green lawns, white fences, and quiet streets. I was married to David for 12 years, a man who was dependable, intelligent, and hardworking. We had 2 beautiful children who went to good schools, and our calendar was filled with soccer practices, PTA meetings, and quiet Sunday mornings. From the outside, we were the definition of a successful middle-class American family. But what people couldn't see was how quietly my happiness was dissolving. David worked in tech and was almost always buried in his laptop or out on business trips. At first, I admired his ambition. But slowly, his long hours became excuses, and his silence at the dinner table felt heavier than any words. I tried to talk to him several times. I asked him if everything was okay, if he was tired, if we could go on a date night like we used to. But every attempt to reconnect was met with vague responses and rushed dismissals. I didn't realize then how alone I had become, even while lying next to someone every night. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a moving truck parked outside the house next door. A man in his early 40s stepped out, fit, handsome in a rugged way, with a calm presence and a warm smile. His name was Jason. He had a young daughter, maybe 8 or 9, who clung shyly to his leg while he greeted neighbors. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes that intrigued me. We exchanged polite hellos at first, small talk at the mailbox, waves during school drop-offs. I had no idea then how much that man would change my life. Over the weeks, Jason began to offer help with little things. He noticed our fence was loose and came over with a drill without even asking. When my car wouldn't start, he was the first one to check the battery. One evening, as I stood outside with the dog in my pajamas, he brought over a plate of freshly baked cookies his daughter had made. "She insisted you get the first batch," he said with a chuckle. His gestures were always gentle, never overbearing, but they made me feel noticed, appreciated, and seen. At first, I told myself I was simply grateful. I hadn't felt someone pay genuine attention to me in a long time. But as days passed, I caught myself smiling when I heard his door open. I waited a little longer at the mailbox, hoping he'd come out. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But something was changing inside me. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. And that scared me more than I cared to admit. The warmth that Jason brought into my life began to highlight just how cold things had become inside my own home. David and I rarely talked anymore. Our conversations had been reduced to logistical check-ins. Who would pick up the kids, what time the plumber was coming, how much we owed on the credit card. When we weren't managing the household like business partners, we were both staring at our screens. Phones, laptops, TVs, anything but each other. The emotional distance had become so normalized that I barely noticed it until someone else started making me feel like a person again. David's behavior grew more suspicious with time. He was constantly on his phone, often stepping outside to take calls. He started working late more frequently and would come home past midnight, mumbling something about back-to-back meetings or last-minute project deadlines. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he was just stressed, that this was just a season of our life we had to push through. But doubt has a way of creeping into even the most hopeful hearts. And once it takes root, it's hard to ignore. One evening while doing laundry, I noticed a receipt tucked inside the pocket of David's coat. It was from a luxury hotel downtown, a place neither of us had ever stayed in, and certainly not the kind of place someone would stop by for a work meeting. The date on the receipt was from last Wednesday, the same night he had told me he was stuck in the office because of a deadline. My hands trembled as I held the slip of paper. My mind raced through all the possible explanations, clinging to anything that might prove my gut feeling wrong. That night, I didn't confront him. I kept quiet, watched him eat dinner as if nothing had changed, and smiled through gritted teeth. But something inside me broke. I started paying closer attention, tracking his location, noticing how he always kept his phone face down, how he suddenly started wearing cologne again after years of not caring about scent. The signs were all there. And yet, I still hoped I was wrong. Meanwhile, Jason continued to show up in small but meaningful ways. He helped me bring groceries inside when my arms were full. He fixed the mailbox when it started to lean. He asked about my day and actually listened when I answered. And slowly, our conversations grew deeper. We talked about parenting, about regrets, about the dreams we had before life got in the way. He told me about his ex-wife, how she left him for her yoga instructor, and how he was just trying to rebuild for his daughter's sake. His presence was like a mirror reflecting all the things I had forgotten I deserved: kindness, patience, and emotional connection. I began to dread David's return home each night and found myself feeling disappointed when Jason's car wasn't in the driveway. The contrast between them was too sharp to ignore. I was emotionally starving, and Jason was unknowingly feeding me one small act of care at a time. As the days went on, my silent suspicion about David's infidelity gnawed at me like a slow poison. I still hadn't confronted him, partly because I wasn't ready to face the truth and partly because I didn't know what I would even do if it was true. Every time I looked at him, I felt like I was staring at a stranger, someone I had once loved deeply but could no longer recognize. And in that void of emotional detachment, Jason's quiet kindness started to feel like something more than just neighborly concern. It began with small, harmless moments. A cup of coffee shared on my front porch while the kids played. A late evening conversation about how fast children grow up and how strange adulthood feels. Jason had this calm energy that made me feel at ease, like I didn't have to pretend or perform. With David, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells, careful not to ask too much, to talk too long, or to push him further away. But with Jason, I could exhale. One Saturday afternoon, it started to rain unexpectedly while I was walking the dog. Jason saw me from his window and ran out with an umbrella. We both laughed, soaked halfway to the bone, as we rushed under the shelter of his porch. That laugh, deep, free, and unforced, was something I hadn't felt in years. I looked at him and he looked at me, and for a brief second, the air between us changed. He looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he simply smiled and handed me a towel. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts spiraled between guilt and longing. Guilt for feeling something I shouldn't, and longing for something I hadn't felt in so long: connection. I kept telling myself that Jason wasn't trying to cross any boundaries, that it was just friendship. But deep down, I knew that emotional intimacy could be just as powerful and dangerous as anything physical. One evening, Jason and I sat on his porch long after the sun had set. The kids were asleep, the neighborhood quiet. We talked about our fears. I told him I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming invisible to the person who once promised to love me forever. He listened, really listened, and then said something that stuck with me. You deserve to feel seen. You deserve someone who chooses you every day, not just out of habit. His words hit something raw inside me. I didn't cry, but I felt like I might. For a moment, I reached out and touched his hand. It wasn't romantic. It was human. It was someone needing to be reminded they mattered. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. We sat like that in silence for several minutes, just two broken people holding onto the only comfort they had found. And still, I told myself this was innocent. Just friendship. Just kindness. But I was starting to realize that when you're starved of affection, even a crumb of warmth can feel like a feast. The truth has a way of bubbling to the surface, no matter how deeply you try to bury it. I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The hotel receipt burned a hole in my conscience, and David's absences were growing more frequent and more obvious. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I finally gathered the courage to confront him. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound between us. I slid the receipt toward him and asked, calmly, "Were you even at work that night?" David looked at it, then looked at me with something between annoyance and panic. His face tightened, his mouth opened slightly, but no words came. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he scoffed, grabbed the receipt, and muttered something about a business meeting that ran late. When I asked why he didn't tell me, he turned cold. "Are we really doing this now?" he snapped, as if my concern was an inconvenience. "You're being paranoid, Emily. You've been acting crazy lately." Gaslighting. I knew the term, but I had never felt it sting so personally. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't deny or admit anything. He just made me feel like I was the problem. Like I was the one betraying him for asking questions. After that night, something inside me changed. My heart didn't just break, it closed. The next day, I tried to act normal for the kids, but I was numb. I didn't even realize I had started crying while taking out the trash until I felt someone tap my shoulder gently. It was Jason. "Hey," he said softly. "Are you okay?" I shook my head, unable to speak. He didn't push. Instead, he took the trash bag from my hand and said, "Come take a walk with me. You don't have to talk. Just walk. We walked slowly down the block, the late evening breeze cool on my face. I told him everything. The distance, the receipt, the lies. I didn't know why I told him, it just spilled out. He listened without judgment, without interruption. And when I finally stopped, he said, "You don't deserve this, Emily. None of this is your fault." We stopped walking. I was standing under a street lamp, and he was facing me, his expression serious but soft. "You're stronger than you think," he said. Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't aggressive or planned. It was gentle, almost questioning. And in that moment, all the loneliness, confusion, and bottled-up emotion inside me exploded. Kissed him back. But as quickly as it happened, I pulled away, guilt crashing over me like a tidal wave. "I shouldn't have," I whispered. "I'm sorry." Jason looked at me, understanding in his eyes, and said, "You don't have to explain anything. I just couldn't keep pretending you don't matter to me." I walked back home alone, heart pounding, unsure of what I had just done, or what it meant for everything else. One thing was clear. The storm had broken. Nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the kiss, the sun seemed too bright, the silence in the house too sharp. I looked at David across the breakfast table and wondered how we had gotten here. Two people sharing space but not a life. The kids were laughing over cereal, unaware of the hurricane swirling just beneath the surface. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come, not yet. I needed to hear the truth from him first, not just what I had found in receipts or late-night absences. I needed him to say it. That moment came 3 days later. David came home earlier than usual, his face tense and tired. He didn't say anything at first, just sat on the couch, elbows on his knees. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Emily, we need to talk." My heart sank. I sat down opposite him, clutching a throw pillow like it could hold me together. He didn't dance around it. He admitted everything, how he had been seeing someone at work, how it started casually during late-night projects, how it eventually turned into something more. Her name was Kara, she was fun, easy to be around, and made him feel young again. Each word was a dagger. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize in the way I wanted him to. His tone was almost clinical. He said he never meant to hurt me, that he still loved me in a way, and that he thought maybe we could work it out for the kids, for the history we shared. But all I heard was, he chose someone else and now he's asking me to pretend it didn't matter. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I simply got up and walked to the bedroom, locked the door, and cried silently into the sheets. I had waited so long for the truth, and now that it was out, I felt hollow. Not angry. Not shocked. Just empty. The kind of emptiness that comes when something you've built your life around crumbles in front of you. Later that night, I texted Jason. He told me everything. He didn't reply with words, he just showed up on my porch 15 minutes later with coffee and a soft look in his eyes. I told him everything David had said, how surreal it felt, and how lost I was. Jason didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't push. He just said, "What do you want, Emily?" "Not for the kids, not for David, for you." I didn't know how to answer that. I had spent so long being a wife and a mother that I had forgotten what it meant to be just me. But I knew one thing. I couldn't go back to pretending. Not after what I knew. Not after how I felt. Not after the kiss. That night, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. Not beside David, but alone in the guest room. And in the quiet, something inside me whispered the most terrifying thought I'd had in years. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is the beginning. The days following David's confession were a blur. We moved around the house like ghosts, barely speaking except when necessary. He made small efforts, cleaning the kitchen, offering to pick up the kids, but everything felt forced. There was no real apology, no real remorse. Just the same man trying to glue together a broken vase with clear tape, pretending the cracks wouldn't show. I stayed calm on the surface for the children, for the sake of appearances, but inside I was unraveling. The woman I had been, the wife who endured, who forgave, was slipping away. I didn't know who was taking her place. Only that she was waking up. It was a rainy Thursday evening when I found myself at Jason's door again. I hadn't planned it. I was supposed to go grocery shopping, but instead I parked in front of his house and just sat there. Maybe I hoped he'd notice me, maybe I hoped he wouldn't. But after a few minutes, he opened the front door and stepped out, umbrella in hand, his eyes meeting mine with quiet understanding. Without a word, I followed him inside. His daughter was at her mother's that weekend. The house was quiet, warm, smelled faintly of cedarwood and rain. We sat on the couch with mugs of tea between us, the silence comfortable but heavy. Then I said it, the words I had been holding back for weeks. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. Like I've been surviving instead of living. Jason looked at me, really looked, and replied, maybe it's time you start choosing what you want, not just what's expected of you. There was no dramatic music, no sudden rush. Just two people slowly leaning into the gravity that had been building between them for weeks. This time, when we kissed, I didn't pull away. There was no resistance left in me, only the quiet acceptance of what we both knew had been coming. The kiss deepened, turned into an embrace, and soon we were lost in each other, two broken people finding something real in the wreckage of their pasts. Afterward, we lay in silence, our bodies tangled in bedsheets, hearts racing but oddly at peace. I stared at the ceiling, expecting guilt to crash down on me like a wave. But it didn't, not in the way I thought it would. Instead, I felt a sense of clarity. What I had done wasn't right by society's standards. But it was honest. More honest than the years of silence, lies, and emotional abandonment I had endured. Jason turned to me and said, I know this changes everything. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to know. I care. For real. His words didn't come with demands or ultimatums. Just presence. Just truth. That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. No nightmares. No overthinking. Just a quiet, guilty peace because while the world might judge me, my heart finally felt something it hadn't in a long time, alive. The following morning, reality returned like a cold wind through an open window. As I drove back home from Jason's, every passing streetlight seemed to flicker with judgment. The guilt I had managed to suppress the night before came flooding in, heavy and suffocating. I wasn't just a wife who had been betrayed anymore, I had become someone who crossed the line I once swore I never would. But what haunted me most wasn't the mistake, it was how little I regretted it. When I walked through the front door, David was in the kitchen making pancakes for the kids, trying, it seemed, to paint over his betrayal with syrup and smiles. He looked up at me with tired eyes, but said nothing. He knew. Or maybe he didn't need to know the details, he could just feel the shift. I wasn't apologetic. I didn't make excuses. I simply said, we need to talk, and that's when everything began to fall apart. I told him I couldn't do it anymore, not the pretending, not the saving of something that had died a long time ago. I told him I knew about his affair, and yes, something had happened with Jason. His face twisted, not with heartbreak, but with rage. So you're no better than me, he snapped, as if my pain had suddenly been erased because I had acted on it. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Later that day, I got a message from a lawyer. He had already contacted someone about a formal separation. The days that followed were brutal. The whispers in the neighborhood started almost immediately. Jason and I were the talk of the street. People who used to wave from their driveways now turned their heads. Moms at the school pickup gave me thin smiles and avoided conversation. I wasn't just the betrayed wife anymore. I was the scandal. The hardest part was the children. They didn't understand. They only saw the cracks, the tension, the sudden change. My son cried when David didn't come home. My daughter asked if it was her fault. I tried to hold them through it, but I was breaking too. Some nights, I cried on the bathroom floor just so they wouldn't hear me. I had made a choice for myself, for the woman inside me who had been screaming for years, but it came at a price. And that price was steep. Jason kept his distance, respectfully. He didn't try to insert himself into the chaos. He checked in, sent short texts asking if I was okay, but never pushed for more. And strangely, I was grateful, because for once, I didn't want to jump into someone else's arms to escape the pain. I wanted to face it, to own it. In the ashes of everything I had built, I was beginning to see the truth. Love doesn't always arrive wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes with guilt, mess, and consequences. And sometimes healing starts with ruin. Months passed. The chaos slowly settled into something quieter. Still painful, but manageable. The legal process moved forward, and David and I officially separated. He moved into a condo across town and began seeing the kids on weekends. Our interactions were civil but hollow. Like two actors reading lines from a script they were both tired of performing. There was no anger left between us, just exhaustion. Whatever love once existed had burned away, leaving only the ashes of responsibility and shared history. I moved into a small apartment not far from the kids' school. It was nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, creaky floors, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had space that belonged only to me. The silence was unfamiliar at first, even frightening. But over time, I learned to find peace in it. I picked up journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I lit candles in the evenings, made meals just for myself, and discovered how much of my identity had been buried beneath the weight of trying to be someone else's definition of good. Jason stayed in my life, but gently, like a steady pulse in the background. He never demanded more than I could give. He knew I was still healing, still rediscovering who I was. We had coffee sometimes. We talked about the kids, about work, about what it meant to start over at this stage in life. The closeness was still there, but it wasn't rushed. And that in itself felt like a kind of love, a patient, respectful one. One evening, I took my kids to a nearby park. My daughter was running through the grass with her brother, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in weeks. I sat on a bench, watching them, the late sunlight casting everything in a warm, forgiving glow. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not everything was fixed, but I wasn't broken anymore. I had walked through betrayal, guilt, loneliness, and judgment, and I was still here. Not the same, but stronger. I realized then that I didn't need anyone to save me, not David, not Jason. What I needed was space to save myself. To stop living in the expectations of others and instead start building a life based on truth, my truth. There would still be hard days, but I knew now that I could survive them. I had already survived the worst. Looking back, I don't know if what happened with Jason was right or wrong by anyone else's standards. But I do know it woke me up. It reminded me that I deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen. And not just by a man, but by myself. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe there's still something waiting for me and Jason. Maybe not. What matters now is that I'm finally living honestly, with my head high and my heart, for the first time in a long time, open. 5.